cut yourself some slack. I know you want it to be perfect. You want that first episode to be as perfect as possible, as professional as possible, but you're just cutting your teeth. You're just starting. And you'd be amazed by people are more interested in the content than the quality.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Hey, podcaster, it's your host, Adam Adams. And today we are joined with Patrick J. O'Donnell from Cops and Writers. So he does a little bit of true crime on his podcast. He interviews a lot of people that write books that also happen to be police officers or former police officers. Patrick is retired a few years ago, and he started his own podcast called Cops and Writers. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is his journey, what he's learned over the last 5-ish years of podcasting. And we're also going to talk a little bit about some of the things that he's learned that he wants to share with you as well. So let's jump in. Patrick, so you retired in, I think, 2020.
Correct.
And then it took you a little while to decide to start a podcast. What was going on in that open space?
Well, I'm a huge fan of the saying, dig the well before you're thirsty. I had the luxury. One great thing about being in law enforcement is you kind of know when you're going to retire, unless something crazy happens, like health wise, or, some kind of tragedy or whatever. You know about when you're going to pull the pin.
Yeah.
And, I was 55 when I retired, and being a cop is a younger guy's game. It ain't an older guy's game. So, yeah, and I loved the street. I didn't want a desk job. I was a sergeant. I was in charge of the cops on the street. So I got to go to all the cool stuff, the shootings and fires and, whatever.
Yeah.
So I was super lucky that way. And through a chain of bizarre events, I guess I could say, or something I did not plan whatsoever, I became an author. And I wrote a few books. You
accidentally became an author.
Yes.
You're the first.
What happened was, like I said, dig the well before you're thirsty. After I hit that 20-year mark, I'm like, now what? I'm not really old enough to, wear really loud Bermuda shorts and leather sandals and, tube socks yet. And yeah, I got to do something, both financially and, just to keep rolling here.
Yeah.
And before I was a cop, I sold cars. I have a bachelor's degree in sociology. My minor was criminal justice, and I had another minor in music. And
cool. I did music as well, music ed.
Oh yeah, I was going to be a band director. That's what
I wanted to do junior high band. How about you? What did you want to teach?
High school. I want to do high school.
Cool.
So I freaking wound up. I'm sorry, my dog wants to say hi. Say hi, Clark. There you go.
For those of you who can't see, he's got a pretty cute dog. What kind is it?
Yeah, he's a rescue. They think he's a Min Pin Chihuahua Rat Terrier.
I feel like I can see a couple of those. I felt like I could see some Chihuahua, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Some mini pincher. So that's cool.
Yeah, he's a big 15-pound. He thinks he's a pit bull or a German Shepherd. He's quite the guy. But yeah, so one of the things I did, armed with my degree in sociology, was sell cars. I had to pay the bills. And back when I was looking for jobs in law enforcement, the competition was fierce. I mean, when I took the test for Milwaukee, there was about 4,000 people that took the written test for maybe a couple hundred jobs. So, I mean, it was tough. So I was on a waiting list.
What is that, like 5%, or is that?
Yeah, probably.
5%?
Yeah. It was dog eat dog. It was really, really tough. Okay. So I had to do something to pay the rent. I got married right out of college. You got to pay the rent. You got to pay your bills. So I sold cars for 4 years. And, eventually I got on the Milwaukee PD, but I kept on helping people buy cars because it's like, hey, he used to sell cars. And somebody's like, you should really write a book about that. And I'm like,
Okay, so this was your first book? And,
yes.
And you didn't write it until after you finished with retiring. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this was a book on how do you buy a car? People to
and it was for the consumer. It was.
How do you buy? How do you not get gypped? Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the title was "I Never Wore Plaid: Insider Secrets from a Former Car Salesperson," and I wrote it under a pen name. It was a glorified PDF. This is back when the advent of Kindle was just kind of kicking off, and you could self-publish. I didn't know you could do that. I thought you had to have a New York agent and go through all the gatekeepers and get like 5 gajillion rejects, rejection letters and, all that kind of stuff. So I'm like, I'm just going to throw it up there. And lo and behold, it actually sold. And I'm like, wow. So I started going to writers' conferences, wrote a few more books. And I'm like, I like this writing thing. This is kind of cool. But if you go to a conference, all the magic is at the happy hour, the bar at the end of the day, whatever, the conversations you have with people, just one-to-one. And inevitably people are, oh, you're that cop guy, right? You're that cop guy. And I'm like, I don't have a t-shirt on saying I am, but yeah, I guess. And they eventually started asking me questions. They're just like, hey, would you need a warrant for this? Would this really happen? Would this gun do this? What would happen if I got shot, blah, 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 for my story? And I'm like, and I helped them out. They were very respectful and nice. And somebody that knows a lot more about books came up to me and he says, you should write a book helping authors with their police procedural stuff. And I'm like, that's a great idea. So I did, and it was gigantic. It was called Cops and Writers. And he's like, the same guy is like, okay, this is way too big. Cut it in half, you'll make double the money. And I'm like, I'm a fan of making money. So I'm like, okay, I'll do that. So I have 2 books out, Cops and Writers, From the Academy to the Street. Another one, Cops and Writers, Crime Scenes and Procedures. And I thought to myself, well, to get exposure for the books, I'm going to go on podcasts. I love podcasts.
Okay.
Always have.
So you started going on other people's shows first?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
how long did it take you to decide, hey, and by the way, how many books is this? Is this 3 published books?
I've got 10 now.
Before you started your podcast?
Oh, before I started the podcast, it was about 5. I think 5.
Oh, only 5. Only 5 published books before you. Okay. So, and the main reason was because you wanted to be able to get your books in front of people so they could sell.
Absolutely. Yes.
And then what made you decide I'm going to have my own show?
What happened to me was, I'm going on people's podcasts and some of them were amazing. They're really, really good podcast hosts that very professional, whatever. And then some weren't. Yeah. And I could tell what the impact was on my book sales. If I was on a podcast that was, really high speed and had a good impact, I'd look at my sales. I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. Then I started thinking to myself, I'm like, you know what? I could do that. And it's fun. I enjoy doing it. I'm not intimidated by being behind the microphone. Yeah. And, way back in college, my brother was a disc jockey at the campus radio station. So I was too. I'd fill in for him. He'd be like, hey, there's a party I really want to go to, or hey, I got a date. And I'm like, sure, I'll fill in and spin some records and have some fun,
That's cool.
Yeah. So it was kind of a natural fit.
Okay.
And then before I know it, it's like, yeah, I'm going to try this podcasting thing. What the heck? Why not?
That's cool. So, and so you launched it about a year after retiring.
Yeah.
After 5 books written and published.
Yes.
How many have you published now?
I've got 10 under my belt now.
10. Do you have a company or anything like this that helps other people publish books? Is there anything like that fits into this podcast called Cops and Writers?
I do not.
Okay.
Now, I do
How do you monetize?
Well,
I kind of cut you off, but no. I'm curious also, how do you monetize? Sure. So go ahead and finish your thought and then share that.
In a couple of different ways. One is, I make enough money with Patreon that pays for the software. I use Buzzsprout. I use Zoom, like the best, like Zoom Pro or whatever the heck it is. And, those are all subscriptions. So my Patreon covers that and a little bit of my time. So it's not a tremendous amount of money, but it's enough to keep it going.
Cool.
Where I'm not losing money. That's the key there. And then what has happened through the years is I've had opportunities happen to me because of the podcast. I got a 4-book deal with a traditional publisher because of the podcast. I interviewed the guy, and the microphone's off, and we're just chit chatting, and he's like, "Hey, I want to get into crime, stuff, blah, blah. What do you think? Do you want to partner up?" And I'm like, "Sure, why not?" So 4 books later with him, that was cool. Then other ways I've made money is I've actually been on television for a couple of true crime documentaries.
How did you get to television? Did somebody pick up a book and say, we got to get this guy on TV? Or did you have somebody help you connect with?
One of the producers of the first show I was on, that was last year, was a fan of my podcast. And she's like, "I love your voice. You could tell a good story. And you've got the credentials. You were a big city cop for 25 years. So, you know what you're talking about." And then another, I just finished up a film documentary over in England, and that is because of the podcast. Whereas I had a British journalist on and a retired, I think, detective constable that broke this like cold case that was like 20 some years old. It was like a real big deal. So I had them on, and this British journalist is friends with somebody that was doing a true crime documentary. And it's like, "Hey, I've got an American guy that you would love," because it was about a corrupt New York City cop. That it was like a murder for hire thing. She was paying her boyfriend to go kill her husband. So I was a part of that project. And none of these things would have ever happened if I didn't have the podcast.
I want to say the same thing. So, because I think this is a big takeaway for the listener. I ended up launching a podcast, my first one, about 10 years ago. And as I was launching that show, it was kind of nerve-wracking. I'm not, well, now I am. It's been 10 years, but prior to that, I learned this over time, but I've always been afraid to do public speaking. I've been afraid to put my voice out there.
You and everybody else, right?
I think my voice sounds funny. I hear my voice sounding a certain way, but then when I hear it, I'm like, "Oh, that doesn't sound like me. That doesn't sound good." And also I stumble on some words every now and again. I still do, but back then it was even worse. And I would say and I still ask questions that it's like 5 questions in one. I'm like, "So blah blah," blah, and I'll probably answer a few of your questions. So that was pretty tough for me. However, I got the first podcast started, and this is for the listener. After a while, I started going and getting featured in other places. Now, had I have just been an expert, listen to this so carefully, write it down. If I had just been an expert in the thing that I was saying I was an expert in, and that's the only thing, I wouldn't have gotten that much publicity. But because I was also a thought leader, because I didn't have a book, but if you've got a book, if you've got a podcast, you've got a YouTube, if you host conferences, if you become a thought leader, now everybody else wants to feature you. It is so strange how that works and how that is real, but it is real. So I started going to all of these conferences, and I would be there for free. I would be there flown in. I would be there speaking on the stage. So I was able to get a bunch of credibility and just eyeballs and earballs on what I was doing, simply because I was a thought leader, simply because I didn't have a book, but if I had a book, or I did have a podcast, or if I didn't have a YouTube back then, but if I've got some type of thought leadership platform, awesome. It helps other people talk about you when you're not in the room. And it also helps them feel like if they feature you, they might get featured somehow as well. And so there's all of that. Plus the squeaky wheel is the wheel that gets the grease. You've got 4 wheels. Only one of them squeaks. Do you go and spend the time and extra effort to put WD-40 on those other 3 wheels? No. You just try to correct the one that's the loudest. So you become the podcaster. You are the podcaster. Now you're getting put in front of other people, and people want to feature you. So Patrick said he probably wouldn't have been on TV if it wasn't for his podcast. And I want you to be thinking of that too. Use your podcast to help you get in front of the most amount of people. Patrick, let's talk about your show. being a show, and I know you got a book called Cops and Writers, right? You've got the book and you've got
I've
the
got
podcast.
two of them. Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about the show Cops and Writers and the premise around it. I know I would like for you to just explain what it is and how it works to the listener.
What I do is I get guests on my show that are most of them are retired law enforcement. Some are still active that have a great story to tell, a compelling story. And most of them have written books about this story. One of the best examples I could give is Steve Murphy. If you ever watched DEA Narcos on Netflix.
No. I've heard of Narcos.
Yeah, it was about him and his partner Javier Pena that went down to Colombia.
Do they put that on like Netflix or something?
Yeah, it's on Netflix. Yeah,
okay, and I feel like I've seen it.
Oh yeah,
not seen it, but like past it. You know what I mean?
Right, and what they did was they're going after Pablo Escobar,
okay,
the world's biggest cocaine dealer. And it was an incredible story. They wrote a book about it, and I got them on my podcast.
Cool.
And that's just one example of but I also have criminals on there too.
And how does that work?
It's great.
Previous criminals or like what exactly is this?
Well,
you're like, you just robbed a bank. Come on my podcast before they catch you.
Yeah. No, I had a guy he's now a mob historian. He was connected to the Gambino crime family in New York City. He spent 10 years in federal prison. Mm. And when he went into prison, he was more or less illiterate, he said. He taught himself to read and write, and he started writing books.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and he's a very, very interesting, compelling guy. He's done some documentaries on A&E about like gang life and some other stuff. And it's Lou Ferrante is his name. And I would love to just sit down and have a coffee with the guy.
It reminds me of the bodybuilder, Lou Ferrigno, I think.
Yeah, Ferrigno, yeah. Not the same.
You have to make sure you got a different person in mind. Is this guy a big, bulky, muscly guy as well?
No, he's not. He is not. But that's just one example of like, okay, he's got a compelling story. He was hanging out with John Gotti's son almost on a regular basis.
Who's John Gotti?
Big time mafia guy.
Oh,
big time mafia guy. So, and he spent 10 years in federal prison. I've never been to prison, don't plan on it. So, I brought him on and he wrote some mob historian books and they're incredibly well written. They're great books. So that's somebody else I want on my show. That's got a great story to tell and has written a book. And they don't necessarily have to write a book, but hey, what's podcasting? Entertaining, informing, inspiring. Yeah. And most of my guests do all the above. I've got people literally from all over the globe I've had on my podcast that were some type of law enforcement, state, federal, FBI, DEA, ATF, all the alphabet soup.
What's DEA stand for again?
Drug Enforcement Agency.
Okay. Hey, let me
drink every afternoon.
Drink every afternoon.
Yeah,
I've been there before. There before. It's been a few years, but I've done that. So here, let me ask you, who is the ideal listener for your show? Who do you think you're adding this value to?
I have a couple. I think first and foremost are the people who are writing crime novels who want to get their facts straight or get some inspiration, maybe a little bit of content. I don't want them plagiarizing, but it's like it might spark something in the brain and say, hey, you know what? This is a great story. What if my character, et cetera, et cetera. So that, and it's turned into it's entertainment. I have a good time with these guests. And so if you want an easy listen, that's not too heavy. I mean, some of my guests have some very stressful stories to tell, like, being shot 5 times, going through a shootout, the adrenaline, and some of it is just education for the public that, hey, you know what? These cops are human beings. They're not robots. And the aftermath of some critical incident that they've been through. I just want people to have some empathy And again, it's education, because what you see on TV isn't even close to being real. So I'm on a little campaign here just to reel it up a little bit.
I didn't know that. I watch TV. I assume it's fairly real. I assume it's
not even close,
similar to how it goes.
Oh God, no.
So here, let's do this. Let's take a quick break, and when we jump back together, Patrick, I want you to share with the listener just like three quick things that this is what they show on TV, and this is how it really is. So we'll be right back with that, and also get some advice for what you would share with yourself, 4 or 5 years ago as you were starting your podcast. We'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, growyourshow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. We're back with Patrick O'Donnell, and he's from Cops and Writers. Now, if you want his full bio, it's out in the show notes. Just grab the show notes, scroll down, and you can get his full bio. If you want to be connected with the books that he's written and his website, it's in the show notes as well. Same thing with Cops and Writers, the podcast. You can start listening to his true crime podcast by just scrolling down. The link's already there for you. That way you can connect with Patrick. Now, we said right before the break that we're going to come back and we're going to talk about a couple of things that TV just totally misses the mark. They get it wrong. And then maybe his best advice for you or for himself a few years ago, for you as a newer podcaster, what he would share with you to get started. So Patrick, let's go with, if you've got three things that TV just misses the mark on what really happens, let's share that with the listener. I think it'd be interesting.
I've got more than three, but let's kick it off here. Detectives, the role of detective. It's often misunderstood, and it is different by department. So if you're writing a book about a Chicago detective compared to, like, say, an LAPD detective, there's going to be different verbiage. There's going to be different roles that they play. Or a Milwaukee detective, say there's a homicide. It's on TV or in the movies, you blink and there's this team of detectives that like fall out of the sky, and they're the first ones there. They're chasing people down alleys. They're doing all the high speed, cool detective-y kind of stuff. It doesn't work like that. The first responders are the cops, and then a sergeant. I was a sergeant. So if we've got a dead body or somebody who was shot, we're the first ones that go. If there's a suspect, we're the first ones who have to deal with the suspect. If there's a shootout, it's the cops or the sergeant that's, directing the cops. So I'll get that out of the way. Then there's the stereotype of the lone wolf detective who's going to break all the rules to, get the bad guy or whatever. There is no such thing as lone wolf detective. They work in teams, and they have bosses who tell them what to do. I liked Harry Bosch. I liked the series Harry, Bosch. That was very popular. It was written by Michael Connelly, just great stuff. But the procedural stuff was very Hollywooded up. It's like his boss more or less is like, okay, Harry, I guess, I know you're doing this or that. Well, you'd be fired, Harry, or you'd be criminally charged, Harry. That's the stuff that just drives me banana cakes. And then there's always the dramatic interrogation scene where they're like in the interrogation room, and he or she is trying to get the criminal to confess to the murder, or, some big, climactic thing like that. And the little things mean a lot. My wife and I were watching, I think it was like Hawaii Five-0 or Chicago PD. And she loves all those shows, and she can't watch them without me anymore. Cause I'm pointing out all these things. You're ruining it. And I'm like, sorry, but this is driving me crazy. So they're trying to get this guy to confess to a murder. He's handcuffed behind his back. That's something we don't do in in a room like that, and the female detective has her gun on her hip. And I'm like, you never, ever, ever, ever go into an interview or interrogation room armed, because it's just you and that other person. Most of the time, it's just one-on-one. Sometimes it might be 2-on-1. Most of the time, it's one-on-one.
So they could grab the gun, or
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, take the gun out of the play here. Just take it out. So that's cop 101. That's very basic. But she is like getting all worked up, this detective, and then she takes her gun out of the holster, puts it in the bad guy's mouth, and she's like, talk. Finally, I'm just laughing out loud. My wife is like, what are you doing? I said, well, first off, he can't talk. There's a gun in his mouth.
Yeah.
Who thinks this shit up? I mean, it's just terrible. Come on, honey. Yeah. And this is 2025. If you're trying to get a confession after you give somebody Miranda, you have the right to remain silent, all that good stuff. It's being recorded, both video and audio.
Mm-hmm.
And a jury's going to see that. A DA is going to see that. The judge is going to see that. If she was doing that in real life, she would go to prison. Simple as that.
Okay.
So,
that makes sense.
Yeah. So
what if they turn off the recordings? Does that ever happen? Because
no.
That happens in the movies.
Yeah, we don't do that because of that. And there's bosses that oversee this stuff. Okay. One of my jobs as a sergeant was, if one of my cops was interviewing somebody or interrogating him, I had to review it.
Okay.
And if there's like 10 seconds or 10 minutes missing, and the guy comes out with hamburger face, okay, Lucy, we got some splaining to do. This is not okay. We don't beat people up. We don't that just drives me crazy.
I have got a question. Because here, let me share back what I think I got from you on most of the things that are different in the movies versus in real life. The first thing I got was that the person who responds first to a crime scene is not going to be the detective. And a lot of times when we're watching the crime scene, when we're watching TV, the detectives show up immediately, but that's usually the main cop and then the sergeant, and then the detectives would come. Secondly, is there aren't lone wolf detectives. So there's not a detective that works by themselves. They usually work in pairs. And then with interrogation scenes, you were talking about how the little things mean a lot. The gun, the mouth, the handcuffed behind the back, and keeping the recordings on all the time are some things that they kind of get wrong on the movies. Now, I just have one random question. This is one of my favorite shows. I don't remember if there was like 6 seasons or what amount of seasons, but I tried to watch the entire thing before it disappeared from Netflix, and it's called Monk. Have you heard of Monk?
You know what? I think I may have watched 1 or 2 episodes.
Okay. There's this guy who's apparently brilliant, and he sees things in a different way. And he wasn't a literal detective anymore. He was a cop, but then they released him. But he was able to still help them with crime, so they hired him separately, kind of like as a what would you call it, like a consultant,
like a PI, a consultant or a private investigator.
A private investigator. Okay, so they would hire him like that. Now, I'm pretty sure that most of the stuff on Monk is pretty fake. But what I am wondering is, does that really happen? Do they have people that are consultants that help, kind of as a detective for different police agencies anywhere that you could think of?
No, not at all.
Doesn't happen.
The only time I could think of, if you need a consultant, maybe they'll hire or get a serologist. That's a blood spatter expert.
What? Okay, so that's like Dexter.
Just like Dexter, yes.
He's a serologist?
Yes, he's a serologist.
They never use that word. I watched like all of the seasons. They always talk, he's the blood guy. He's a blood spatter expert.
Yes, and it's
blood
spatter, not
analysis.
splatter.
So it's called what again? What is the name?
A serologist.
So the A is just like a single person.
Serologist.
And then the real word is serologist.
Yes.
And so the study of blood would be serology?
Yeah, a blood spatter expert. The blood spatter tells a story. There's a difference between like a streak of blood on the floor that would be indicative of somebody getting dragged, or they're kind of dragging themselves.
Okay.
Blood droplets.
Patrick, have you watched Dexter?
My last book that I wrote 2 months ago is based on Dexter. It's called The Good Collar. And what it is instead of the serologist, he's the police chaplain, is the serial killer.
Okay.
Everybody loves him. He can get in and out of crime scenes without question.
Yeah.
And he rights all the wrongs.
That is interesting. Good stuff. All right, let's go into that part where you're looking at yourself 4 or 5 years ago, or somebody who's listening to this show right now who is newer into their journey. What would be the top 1 or 2 things that you'd want to share with somebody who's just getting started?
Cut yourself some slack. I know you want it to be perfect. You want that first episode to be as perfect as possible, as professional as possible, but you're just cutting your teeth. You're just starting. And you'd be amazed by people are more interested in the content, I believe, than the quality. Not that you should have a bad, like scratching and, all kinds of distractions. But is it going to be perfect? No, it will not be perfect. And as you go along,
even this episode isn't perfect, Patrick. Like even this episode, and I've done 1,300 episodes already.
Wow.
And it's still not perfect. And so I guess that goes to your point. It doesn't need to be perfect. You said it's the content, not necessarily the quality. And I think of it like, if I'm sharing like my heart, or if I'm doing my best to give value to the listener, then we're going to win. But if we think of something else and aren't thinking about the value, like for example, if I'm thinking about myself, like going back to the issues that I had, being embarrassed to be in front of people,
sure,
then it would be a worse episode. So it sounds like we need to cut ourselves some slack. We need to jump in, we need to go ahead and do it. And we need to understand that even if it's not perfect, if it has that value and maybe even the entertainment factor being valuable too, then I think that that's going to be something that we can work on. Keep going, because I think you had more on this.
Yeah, I do. So, content I think is king. Cut yourself a little bit of slack. It will get better. And thinking back, like way back when, I was lucky enough to get some very popular high-speed people on the show right away. I wish I wouldn't have done that.
Oh, really?
Mostly because I really didn't have my groove in yet. I really didn't have, obviously you do a ton of podcasts. You kind of have a way of doing things you feel comfortable with, and you produce a good quality product. It's not perfect. It never will be. But your first couple, maybe a friend, maybe whatever, it doesn't have to be a home run the first time you step foot in the batter's box.
Yeah. Good stuff. I like that. And I think that that's encouraging. If we're new, if we're just considering starting a show. And those are some things, Patrick, that hold people back. Those are some of the things that might hold our listener back today. So just giving them, I guess, what would be the right word for it? The permission, maybe?
Yes.
To learn?
Exactly.
I think is a good place to start.
And I think you learn by doing this. You learn the technical stuff by doing it. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to spend... I remember when I was like very, very new at this, I almost over-edited, where it's like, oh God, he said, I got to take that out. That type of stuff, where now it's like, yeah, if somebody sneezes or coughs or or if there's like a really long pause, I'll take that out. I'll edit that. But for the most part, I try to keep it as real as possible.
I like that. Real quick, let's transition, and I want to talk to the listener for a moment. As a reminder, Cops and Writers, the podcast, that link is in the show notes. Any social media that Patrick wanted you to have, that link is also down in the show notes, so you could find those links to connect with him there. If he's got a website, it's all down there. His bio is all down there. So I appreciate you being with us on this episode. The next episode is going to be a great one as well. Do not go away. I'll see you on the next episode.
Oh, hey, because 3 of my clients came to me recently looking to find a way to have their podcast make the money instead of cost them money. we put together a resource for some of our clients, and I want to give it to you as well. It's something that did actually seem to help, because one of them is now making $2,600 a month, another one's $4,500 a month, and the third is making between $5,000 and $10,000 each month. And so it's been a resource that's been incredibly valuable to them. It's our sponsor sheet template. It's a template of a sponsor sheet, and it gives you something that you can hand to potential sponsors and hopefully also be making $2,600, $4,500, or between $5,000 and $10,000 regularly each month with your podcast. So this has been a contributing factor to helping all three of those clients turn their podcast into an additional income stream for them. And the way that you can find it is just going to our website, growyourshow.com, but put in /templates, growyourshow.com/templates. And then you can actually download that template and others that could be valuable to your podcasting experience. I'll see you on the next episode.